I knew something was wrong the moment my badge didn't open the compliance vault. It was 7:42 a.m., and I'd already had 2 cups of coffee and skimmed the new FAA advisory that dropped overnight. My morning rhythm was muscle memory. Unlock the vault, check the audit queue, log any escalations from overnight maintenance ops. But today, the badge just blinked red. No click, no access. I tried again. Same thing. A maintenance tech named Carlos passed behind me, gave a quick "Morning, Jordan," and I just nodded, heart pounding. I called security. They said my badge had been deactivated pending HR update. And that's when it hit me. Brent had pulled the trigger. If you're already hooked, take a second to subscribe and like the video. It helps this team keep these stories flying. 97% listen without subscribing, and we'd really appreciate your support to keep going. Back to the story, because this ride gets worse before it lands. I didn't scream, didn't argue. I walked back to my desk, opened my backup binder, and took out the envelope I'd labeled 422B custodian copy. It wasn't dramatic, just deliberate. 18 years of keeping the wires from crossing, of making sure every inspection passed without red flags, of updating protocols so Stratacore didn't become another tragic NTSB footnote. I sent one email to legal, CC'd the FAA liaison, and attached the document. This is to formally confirm that my termination was executed without succession planning as required under Clause 422B of the Federal Operations Continuity Act. As of 7:42 a.m., access to the custodian terminal has been revoked, and no qualified replacement has been submitted to the FAA database. Per guidelines, all upcoming certification actions are now legally non-compliant. I didn't expect a reply, and I didn't get one. Not then, anyway. Brent had swaggered into the role like some discount Tom Cruise in a too-tight polo and fake humility, all just here to optimize, and Alan asked me to shake things up. He didn't understand compliance, and worse, he didn't respect it. He thought it was paperwork, bureaucracy, something a young hotshot with a clicky PowerPoint could automate and outsource. I tried to brief him during Alan's last week in office. Pulled up the FAA charter on a screen, walked him through what happens when a registered custodian of record is removed without transfer protocol. He laughed. "Jordan, I've read it. That clause was written for when companies were still using floppy disks. You'll get it. Ops just needs a little air to breathe. You've built a strong foundation. Time to hand it off." I said, "To who?" And he just smiled. "You're going to love the freedom." I didn't, but I said nothing. I documented, I logged, I made sure the paper trail wasn't a trail, it was a runway. The day Alan left for Spain, Brent had a meeting titled Compliance Optimization, Internal Only. I wasn't invited. Neither were the engineering leads, just Brent, 2 HR reps, and someone from finance. That same afternoon, I noticed the dashboard alerts were suspended. The auto-escalation queue turned off. By Monday, the files I'd flagged for FAA review were gone from the active queue and dumped into archive. By Tuesday, my name was missing from the custodian registry. And by Friday, my badge stopped working. It wasn't just betrayal, it was stupidity. Institutional, baked-in stupidity dressed up in buzzwords and false confidence. Brent had no clue what my title meant, what the FAA required, what a lapse would trigger. He thought he'd eliminated dead weight. In reality, he'd just cut the brake line on a 747 mid-descent. I sat on the edge of my desk and looked out at the hangar yard, watching ground crews run their morning safety checks. My phone buzzed. A text from one of the engineering VPs. "Hey, did you switch departments or something? Brent just told us you're not with compliance anymore." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I'd already triggered the first warning. In 5 business days, Stratacore's FAA certification would be marked pending custodial confirmation. 10 days later, automatic suspension of flight operations pending federal investigation. And in the middle of it all, Alan, still on vacation, unaware his house was on fire, was somewhere between Madrid and Oslo. They thought I'd go quietly. I did. But that doesn't mean I left empty-handed. Brent had this way of talking like every meeting was a TED Talk and he was saving the company from a burning building that only existed in his head. Every other sentence started with "at my last firm" or "when I ran ops in Berlin," and ended with some condescending garbage about how compliance needed to be less reactive and more scalable. He never once asked how we'd passed 7 straight federal audits, never asked who wrote the original inspection readiness protocols or how we'd managed to retain FAA pre-clearance status for defense contracted flights. He just walked in with his rolled up sleeves and started gutting systems he didn't understand. Week 1, he canceled the weekly compliance stand-up. Week 2, he introduced a new initiative called Clear Skies, a stripped-down dashboard with no real-time tracking, no timestamping, and no audit lock controls. He showed it off like a toddler with a finger painting. "This is our future," he grinned. "Intuitive, frictionless, cloud-native." Never mind that the FAA requires cold storage, encrypted redundancy, and on-prem control logs for anything tied to military contracts. I raised it in the Thursday sync. "Brent," I said calmly, "the FAA mandates that we maintain a named custodian with uninterrupted sign-off authority. Form 422B was submitted in my name last year. It's valid through Q4. You can't just—" He cut me off. "We'll reassign coverage," he said, like he was moving paper clips between drawers. "Legal can tweak the language." I stared at him. "That's not how federal regulation works." He chuckled like I'd just told a dad joke. "Jordan, you've built a great system, really, but we're moving to something a little more modern. The agency needs to evolve." I didn't say it out loud, but I thought, evolution requires understanding the species you're replacing. He had none. So I flagged it. In writing, subject line, "Custodial risk re Form 422B, urgent." Attached the full clause, quoted the federal reg, laid out the risks in bullet points, sent it to legal, HR, and Brent. No reply, no red receipt, just silence. I followed protocol. I always do. Because one day someone's going to ask who warned them, and my name's going to be on that email. By Friday, I noticed small changes happening behind my back. Brent sent an email to the flight training division suggesting they start inputting simulator data directly into the new ops hub, meaning Clear Skies. The team pinged me, confused. I checked the file structure. He'd routed them around our FAA-certified system entirely. That's when I knew he wasn't just ignoring compliance, he was dismantling it. And the timing couldn't be worse. The Q4 inspection was just 13 days out. Every day we needed system redundancy checks, personnel revalidations, updated logs. Instead, Brent was hosting what he called efficiency reviews, which looked a lot like witch hunts. He'd gather middle managers into the boardroom, pull up department charts, and ask, "Who here can justify this headcount?" The man didn't know what a Form 882 was, but he could recite our salary report by heart. A week before my badge died, I bumped into Alan's EA, Wendy, in the break room. She lowered her voice. "Brent asked me if Alan had ever put you on a PIP. I blinked. "What?" "He was trying to find documentation. Anything suggesting you'd underperformed." There wasn't any. I'd been nominated for internal awards 3 times, had letters of commendation from both the FAA and Department of Defense, never missed a deadline, never botched a report, never failed an audit. But Brent didn't care about facts. He cared about optics, about being seen as the guy who trimmed the fat before the next board review. He wanted to walk into that investor call and say he'd restructured compliance, digitized oversight, saved 6 figures by removing friction. He didn't even realize he'd be walking in with a ticking time bomb in his hand. I should have gone to Alan. But Alan was halfway across the globe, unplugged, trusting that his deputy wouldn't light the cockpit on fire. And me, I was still hoping logic might win, that someone, legal, HR, even Brent himself, would take 10 minutes, read the clause, and realize what they were doing. Instead, my access log showed Brent had overridden 3 backup directories and triggered a credential audit on my admin account. He wasn't reading the warnings. He was trying to erase the one person who wrote them. It was a Monday morning dressed like any other, except it wasn't. I knew before he opened his mouth. Brent had this look, this overeager expression like a kid who just broke a vase and convinced himself it was art. He waved me into the ops conference room like he was welcoming me to a TED Talk he'd titled "Why I'm the Smartest Guy in the Room." The door clicked shut behind me. No HR rep, no witness, just him, arms crossed in front of the whiteboard, which still had my handwriting on it from Friday's audit prep meeting. He hadn't even bothered to erase it. "You're off the team, effective immediately." 7 words, no empathy, no explanation. He didn't sit. He didn't blink. I blinked once. "Alan's aware?" I asked. He nodded like a game show host confirming the wrong answer. He delegated full interim authority. I'm running this now. You might want to check with legal before finalizing this. He gave a smug little shrug, the kind that belongs on a teenager, not an acting director of ops with a 5-figure Rolex and a 6-figure blind spot. No need, it's already been processed. Just leave your badge with security. I stared at him for a breath too long, not with rage, not even disbelief, just noting the moment, like you would a historic weather event or a bridge snapping under pressure. I wondered if he'd still be smug when the first FAA notice hit his inbox. Then I stood, adjusted the strap on my bag, walked out. Didn't shake his hand, didn't look back, didn't say goodbye. Security blinked when I handed over my badge. You resigning? The guard asked. No, I said, flat. Just following instructions. He looked confused, but not as confused as Brent would be in about 72 hours. By the time I reached my car, my mind wasn't racing. It was cataloging. FAA deadlines, custodian renewal triggers, active certifications, contractual penalties. Everything Brent had just invalidated by removing me without protocol. I'd warned him. I'd flagged it, documented it, reiterated it. And now he'd made it real. There was no dramatic music, no HR box filled with sad desk plants. Just my bag, my laptop, and a folder I'd prepped weeks ago. Continuity in case of termination. It wasn't paranoia, it was insurance. Because I've seen what happens when people like Brent think regulation is optional. Planes don't crash because one thing fails. They crash because 10 small things were ignored until gravity finally won. He thought he was eliminating friction. He'd just cut the hydraulics. As I pulled out of the lot, the first notification hit. An internal system alert. Custodian credentials deactivated. My access logs were flagging API errors already because the backend still recognized me as the named custodian on 5 active inspection pathways. Replacing me wasn't a checkbox. It was a federally documented transition requiring FAA approval, digital key transfers, and license attestation. Brent had done none of it. And the Q4 audit, 13 days away. The countdown had already started. I drove in silence. No music, just the soft clicking of my turn signal as I merged into the right lane. Because the system may have forced me out, but it was about to learn what removal without protocol actually costs. And Brent? He was still in that conference room, probably feeling like a king, leaning back in the chair I used to occupy, already bragging to someone about how he made the tough call. The tough call that would cost Stratacore millions in revoked contracts, grounded operations, and emergency remediation once the FAA started asking questions. But that wasn't my problem anymore. He hadn't fired a cog. He'd fired the only person who knew how the machine worked. By Tuesday, the silence had grown teeth. No internal announcement, no goodbye brunch, not even a Slack message from HR. Just a void where my name used to be on access logs and dashboard audits. But the system I'd built wasn't designed to vanish quietly. Compliance doesn't do clean exits. It clings. Every automation script, every permissions gateway, every FAA-linked process still carried one name, mine. Brent must have assumed killing the badge killed the role. That's the thing about people like him. They think authority comes from titles, not systems. What he didn't realize was that the system had a heartbeat, and it was already skipping. Legal didn't even realize I was gone until Thursday morning. Someone from the regulatory liaison team sent a routine email asking for my pre-check sign-off on the Q4 FAA certification packet. It bounced. That triggered the first help desk ticket. IT thought it was a permissions glitch and rerouted it. By noon, legal pinged HR. Is Jordan on PTO? HR hesitated, then sent over Brent's form. Status? Terminated. Reason? Department streamline. That's when the klaxon went off. Clause 422B wasn't obscure. It wasn't buried in some forgotten appendix. It was printed in bold right at the top of every custodial compliance renewal. FAA Form 422B required a single, registered custodian, licensed, certified with active FAA clearance, whose continuous sign-off authority remained unbroken from one audit cycle to the next. Unbroken. That was the word Brent missed. The minute he filed that HR form, the continuity clock stopped. No handoff, no successor attested, no FAA notification logged. which meant Stratacor's operational compliance was no longer valid, which meant their military-adjacent permits were at risk, which meant within 14 business days, the entire flight ops division would be grounded under federal suspension. The first email from legal was frantic. Who assumed custodian responsibilities following Jordan's termination? Has FAA Form 422B Supplement C been filed? Silence. Second email, this time to Brent directly. Please confirm who is designated custodian of record effective immediately. FAA attestation must be received within 72 hours to prevent compliance lapse. Brent's reply was exactly what I expected. Working on internal realignment should be able to plug someone in. We've got flexibility. Flexibility, my God, you don't plug someone into a federal custodial role. It's not a light bulb. It's a person who spent years building layered documentation, passing clearance cycles, logging FAA and DoD verifications, maintaining encryption tokens, and validating simulation thresholds. You don't just pick Brad from training because he's good with spreadsheets. And here's the kicker. I hadn't just written our internal protocols. I'd embedded auto-notification logic into the ClearLog system. Meaning, as soon as the system detected the absence of an active custodian tied to current inspection cycles, it began flagging the audit dashboard. Red, bold, loud. Custodian verification expired. Action required. Brent tried to suppress the warning, had it temporarily mute dashboard alerts. But the problem wasn't just the alert, it was the flight scheduling software that used the same trigger. Once that flag went red, it automatically blocked federal flight plans from being scheduled without override. Pilots began submitting help desk tickets. Engineering couldn't validate safety drills. Training coordinators couldn't log simulator hours because the custodian wasn't just a person, it was a keystone. And Brent had ripped it out like it was a sticky note. By Friday, whispers were spreading. Something was off. The operations hallway had gone tight with that kind of nervous quiet usually reserved for weather delays or close calls. Someone forwarded me a screenshot, taken from the master scheduling dashboard. FAA operations blocked, awaiting custodian validation. Underneath, a blinking countdown. 12 business days until permit suspension. I sipped my coffee and saved the image. I didn't respond. Didn't poke the hornet's nest. Didn't need to, because somewhere over the Atlantic, Alan was halfway through a glass of in-flight wine, unaware his entire company had just filed its own crash report and signed it with my name removed. By Monday morning, Brent's smirk was gone. He stormed into a tea like a man who'd just discovered the autopilot wasn't connected to the steering wheel. I wasn't there to see it, obviously, but I knew the script by heart. First, he tried logging in with admin override. That failed. Then he demanded a credential reset from system security. That failed too. By the time he slammed into the director's office demanding root-level access to ClearLog, 3 engineers had already sent up red flags to the legal team, asking why the acting director was trying to override a federal compliance vault. The system didn't care that Brent had an org chart. It only responded to biometric chain of custody. Because I'd built it that way. Every login to the compliance dashboard required a dual authentication sequence, my FAA-issued biometric ID, plus a rotating token known only to the custodian of record. There was no backdoor, no shortcut, no universal key. The system had been audited 7 times, and each time the Fed said the same thing. This is the most secure documentation chain we've seen. Brent hadn't just fired me. He'd erased the only legal interface between Stratacor and federal systems. Now he was fumbling with the controls mid-flight, discovering too late that the manual had self-destructed the moment I left the building. It did what they could. They combed through version logs, scraped server snapshots, pulled partial entries from the sandbox environment. But without my biometric token, tied to my active FAA custodian license, none of it would unlock. Not the pre-cert checklist, not the simulator logs, not even the inspection readiness dashboard. Worse, the physical override key, the one we kept for total system shutdown emergencies, wasn't just floating around in some drawer labeled break glass. It was in a tamper-sealed envelope filed inside the legal custodian protocol binder, marked explicitly, "Do not open without CEO authorization." Alan's signature was required. Alan, who was still in a hotel room on the Amalfi Coast, probably drinking espresso and thinking his company hadn't just been unplugged from a federal air grid. I got the first call from legal at 10:11 a.m. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Jordan, this is Carla in corporate legal. We're trying to clarify the status of the override credentials. We believe you may still have active control of the audit framework. If you could please... I stopped listening. 30 seconds later, another call. This one from Stratacor's external compliance auditor. Hi, Jordan. I understand you've recently transitioned roles, but we're receiving conflicting access requests from your team. Would love to confirm if you've appointed a new system custodian. I didn't reply, because I wasn't going to fix the mess Brent made just so he could pretend nothing happened. They fired the only pilot who knew how to land the plane. Now they were scrambling in the cockpit, yanking levers, hoping one of them turned the ground back on. That afternoon, Brent sent out a company-wide message. Subject: Compliance system maintenance, temporary downtime expected. 3 sentences of corporate nothingness, no apology, no explanation, just spin. Like the FAA would read that and go, "Oh, okay, cool, we'll delay the audit for your vibes." Meanwhile, employees were panicking. Flight instructors couldn't certify drills. Safety officers couldn't log inspections. Pilots couldn't file operational readiness for upcoming test flights. Someone leaked a screenshot from the internal ticket queue. One message, all caps. When will system access be restored? FAA called again. I'm out of answers. Underneath, a reply from an IT tech. We're working on it. Root access is restricted until CEO authorization is secured. Another message came later that night from an old friend in engineering. Did you really lock them out? I replied with a single sentence. They pulled the plug on the flight engineer and now they're wondering why the lights won't turn on. They thought the logbook was just a folder. They didn't realize it was a black box, and I was the only one who could read it. Alan touched down at Heathrow at 6:04 a.m. local time, bleary-eyed and 2 espressos behind schedule. He hadn't even cleared customs when his phone lit up like a Christmas tree with alerts from Slack, Outlook, Teams, and a flagged text from legal reading. Urgent. FAA permits at risk. Call ASAP. He barely glanced at the other 80 unread messages before dialing Carla from legal in the back of a cab. She picked up on the first ring. "Alan," she said, her voice tight. "We've got a situation." She didn't waste time with pleasantries. While Alan watched London blur past the taxi window, she walked him through the situation in surgical detail. My termination, the missing custodian override, the grounded inspection pipeline, and finally, the clause he'd never had to think about before. Form 422B, she said, her voice cracking ever so slightly, requires a certified compliance custodian. If terminated without a formal FAA-approved successor, documented, licensed, and biometrically cleared, the permit becomes void within 14 business days. Alan didn't speak for a beat. Then came his only question, low and sharp. Who signed off on her removal? There was silence on the other end of the call, not the uncomfortable kind. The kind that says everything. Carla cleared her throat. Brent submitted the termination form. HR assumed you'd approved it. We only found out when FAA systems began rejecting credentials this morning. He didn't consult you? No. Did he assign a successor? No one qualified. He listed himself on the interim contact form. It was auto-rejected. Alan exhaled, slow and hard. Somewhere between baggage claim and corporate collapse, it hit him. The plane was in a nosedive, and the man at the controls thought the oxygen masks were just decoration. "Where's the override key?" Alan asked. "In legal custodian protocol," Carla said. "Still sealed. Your authorization is required to open it." "Has anyone touched it?" "Not yet. Per your last standing order." Alan rubbed his temple. That order had been my suggestion. Never open the override unless absolutely necessary and only under CEO signature. At the time, it had seemed like a formality. Now it was the last firewall holding back full-blown federal scrutiny. FAA's called twice, Carla added. They're asking who's certifying the Q4 audit cycle. And they don't have access to the logs? No, we've tried. Systems are still hard-locked. Biometric validation is rejecting all new entries. Without Jordan's FAA credentials, we can't access the simulator archives, inspection pipeline, or the incident drill records from July. And the DoD contract, they've noticed the alerts. Alan swore under his breath. He wasn't a reckless man. In fact, his leadership had always leaned toward caution, toward structure. That's why I'd lasted 18 years, because I understood structure, and I never let it crack. Alan didn't need me to schmooze investors or give town halls. He needed someone who understood what kept the birds in the air and the feds off our backs. And now, with a single unapproved firing, Brent had sawn off the wing mid-flight. Alan stared at the screen as Carla emailed over the system status dashboard. There it was, top of the stack, in red. FAA compliance. Status, at risk, custodian status, null override access, restricted time remaining until suspension, 9 business days. At the bottom of the screen was a line Alan hadn't noticed before. Registered custodian, Rives, Jordan E. FAA ID, JR 7721. Last confirmed credential validation. Active. Alan didn't blink, because that was the moment he understood. The contract didn't care who had the title. It only recognized one name. Mine. By the time Alan's third call came through, I was already in a conference room across town, badge clipped to a new lanyard, onboarding packet in front of me with the Vectora Aviation logo stamped in raised ink. The first call from him had come around 6:00 a.m. I ignored it. The second came 45 minutes later, voicemail only. His voice was tight, urgent, but careful. Jordan, we need to talk. Please call me back as soon as possible. As if decorum might undo what had already been set in motion. I didn't respond, because I wasn't waiting for Stratocore to figure out the crash. I was already helping build something better. Vectora had been sniffing around for a while, quietly, respectfully. Their CTO had reached out months earlier after a joint training session in Atlanta. If you ever decide you're ready for something more progressive, she'd said over coffee, give me a call. We don't have dead weight, we just have flight plans that need new engines. At the time, I'd thanked her and tucked the card away. The day Brent locked me out, I found that card again. Took a photo of it. No message, just the photo. She replied within 20 minutes. You available today? We'll skip the panel and run an expedited process. I started onboarding 2 days later. They gave me control of 3 major compliance pipelines before lunch. No debates, no condescension, no agile optimization from men who had no clue what we were optimizing for. Just trust, authority, respect. Meanwhile, Stratocore was spiraling. My former colleagues were whispering in corners, unsure what to say, unsure what they were allowed to say. They couldn't certify drills, couldn't log simulator hours, couldn't file pre-flight reports without the dashboard authorizations I used to manage. One of them, Diane from Safety and Training, texted me late that evening. Are you okay? People are panicking. Brent says it's a system bug. We know it's not. I just replied, I'm fine. Tell them to check the FAA portal. She didn't respond right away, but the next morning I got a screenshot. It was from the FAA compliance database, a quiet little update that meant the world to anyone in aviation. New custodial authority, registered. Organization, Vectora, Aviation Custodian. Jordan E. Rives role, Chief Compliance Architect, effective immediately, no fanfare, no headlines, just a factual transfer of power. I didn't post about it. Didn't message anyone at Stratocore. I knew someone there would see it. Probably legal first, then Alan, then everyone else. Because when you're dealing with federal systems, the records speak louder than any PR campaign. Brent had removed me from Stratocore without understanding what I carried, what I'd built, what was tied to my name. He didn't fire a mid-level manager. He severed the link between his company and its own ability to fly. Now that link lived somewhere else, somewhere better. At Vectora, my access badge worked on the first try. My name was already on the org chart. And my desk? It had a window, not to the parking lot, but to the tarmac. Alan didn't even make it to his office. He walked straight off the elevator, travel coat half buttoned, still carrying the scent of recycled air and hotel espresso, and beelined toward Brent's glass-walled corner like a man with no time left to pretend. The admin tried to intercept him. Mr. Albright, do you want to schedule it? But he waved her off mid-sentence. He hit Brent's door hard enough it bounced. Walked right in. In his hand, a printed copy of the HR termination form, wrinkled, scribbled with underlines, the timestamp circled 3 times in red ink. What did you do while I was gone? Brent stood, confused, hesitant, then defensive. Alan, Look, it's all under control. Alan slammed the paper onto Brent's desk like it burned his fingers. You terminated our FAA custodian during an open audit cycle. Do you have any idea what you've done? Brent blinked. It was part of the restructure. We've been transitioning compliance. Transitioning to who? Alan barked. Operations is absorbing oversight. It's more efficient. Alan cut him off. You're not absorbing oversight. You've severed our federal continuity. You killed our flight status and didn't even know it. Brent opened his mouth to reply, but legal was already calling them into the boardroom. Inside, Carla from legal stood by the screen, pale and tight-lipped. A few members of the compliance team had been pulled in, sitting awkwardly in chairs along the back wall. No one made eye contact. Everyone was waiting to see how many limbs this thing was going to take. Let's walk through what we're dealing with, Carla said, remote in hand. Slide 1 appeared. FAA permit status, pending cancellation, custodial status, unassigned next slide. Cause, unauthorized termination of registered custodian form 4222B. Breach, no successor assigned system override access, restricted. CEO authorization required slide 3. Time remaining until federal suspension, 6 business days. Brent tried to speak. Alan raised a hand to silence him. His jaw was locked. His eyes didn't move. Then Carla clicked to the final slide. The room went still. A simple header, clean and undeniable. New FAA Custodial Authority Registered Organization. Vectora Aviation Custodian Jordan E. Reves. Title. Chief Compliance Architect. Below that, the Vectora logo. Crisp. Professional. Glowing like a lighthouse on a fog-choked shoreline. Alan stared. And Brent? Brent went gray. Visibly, like someone had pulled the oxygen out of his lungs and replaced it with ash. He didn't ask who approved it, didn't ask how it happened, because the only thing more obvious than the mistake was that it was irreversible. Alan looked at him, finally, slowly. You didn't just fire her, he said. You transferred our entire federal custodianship to a competitor. You handed them every clearance, every audit protocol, every pipeline she architected, and you did it without a successor in place. Brent stammered. I thought... No, Alan snapped. You didn't think. You acted. And now we're 6 days from being grounded under federal review with no custodian, no access, and no recovery protocol. Silence. Absolute. Not even the sound of a keyboard clacking. In the back of the room, one of the compliance engineers slowly closed her laptop, like it wouldn't be needed anymore. Alan didn't need to shout. The numbers had already done the screaming. And Brent? He didn't look angry anymore. He looked like a man staring at the edge of a canyon and finally realizing he was the one who cut the bridge. He didn't fire me. He triggered the exit of the only person who knew how to keep the wings from falling off. And he handed the black box to someone else. A week later, the revocation came through. Clean, clinical, irreversible. FAA permit 48392D revoked due to custodial breach and non-compliance. All active certifications suspended pending revalidation. Flight operations grounded. No amount of late-night emails or panicked calls to compliance liaisons could undo the damage. The system doesn't care how sorry you are. It only cares who holds the key, and Brent never had it. The news didn't make headlines. It didn't need to. In the aviation world, word travels faster than radar. Clients started pulling contracts within 48 hours. First, the defense partners, then the federal contractors, then the private firms who didn't want their names anywhere near non-compliant in a quarterly report. Alan sent out a company-wide email the morning after the revocation hit. Subject line, Internal Transition Announcement. The body was 3 sentences. Effective immediately, interim management adjustments are in place. A full audit of compliance operations is underway. Further updates will follow under new leadership. No name, no farewell. Just procedural fallout from a decision that never should have happened. Security walked Brent out of the building before lunch. He didn't clear his desk, didn't stop by anyone's office, just left, red-eyed, clutching a manila folder like it still had weight. But the truth is, you can't paper over a free fall. You can only hit the ground quieter than expected. Meanwhile, Vectora moved with precision. They didn't gloat, they didn't spin. They released a single line on their website's team page, welcoming Jordan Reves to lead our national compliance initiative. No quotes, no history, just facts. That was the difference. Stratacore relied on optics. Vectora understood function. I printed the release on a plain sheet of paper. folded it clean down the center, slid it into the back sleeve of my logbook, behind the old audit templates and flight readout diagrams I still kept out of habit. Then, in ink, on the inside cover, I wrote, "Always check who's flying the plane before you fire the pilot. No signature, no timestamp, just the truth. Because not every crash comes with smoke and sirens. Some are silent, just permanent."